Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte. Not feeling so fabulous at the moment with that
there.
Story from NPR and this from the UK Guardian. Tina Turner, the pioneering rock and roll star who became a pop behemoth in the 1980s.
And beyond.
I was going to say, in the 80s, I mean, by then she was already well-established behemoth, I think.
Yeah.
At age 83 after a long illness. We'll rhapsodize about Tina Turner later in the show because, of course, we have a segment every week that is named in homage.
And I sing in her style very poorly.
But I don't think very poorly. I think you do
poor.
well. Later in the show, we'll also be joined by Addison McDonald, the general manager of performing arts and film at Mass MoCA, to take a look at some of the wicked cool things headed to North Adams this summer.
And do you drink iced coffee or iced tea? Resident wordster, senior editor at Merriam-Webster, Emily Brewster, brings our attention to words that seem to be losing some of their letters, but not their meanings.
And right now, the remains of dozens of Native people who were dug up from their graves in central and western Massachusetts are still on museum shelves. That's despite a more than 30-year-old federal law that was designed to return them to their communities. As New England Public Media's Nancy Cohen reports, proposed changes to regulations would require museums to speed up the process.
In the late 1800s and in the 1900s, universities and museums sponsored archaeological digs where they excavated the remains of Native people. Amateur collectors would also dig up remains and sometimes donate them to a school library or museum. Shannon O'Loughlin of the Association on American Indian Affairs says it's a violation of human rights.
Institutions and collectors have throughout history removed Native bodies from their places of rest without any consent or disclosure to the people's relatives who were affected by this practice.
And there's a federal law that addresses this, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, or NAGPRA. It outlines a process for museums to return Native ancestors to tribes, but it's moved slowly. Today, more than 100,000 ancestors are still stored in museums. Melanie O'Brien, who manages NAGPRA for the federal government, says most of those remains were given the same label by museums in the 1990s.
Nearly all of them are culturally unidentifiable.
But now proposed rules would eliminate the term culturally unidentifiable. O'Brien says that's in part because many tribes find the term offensive.
As they do believe that those ancestors have a cultural identity and they would like to have them repatriated.
If approved, Shannon O'Loughlin says the proposed regulations would underscore something that's already in the law, using the geographic location of where the remains came from to make a connection between the ancestor and a modern-day tribe.
So that way, museums are basically hit on the head with the requirement that geography is enough to repatriate and affiliate.
Even if the museum has only vague information of where the remains came from. A secure door at the Yale Peabody Museum in New Haven leads the way to a vast storage facility.
We have 17 or 18 different types of storage within this space. It's about 17,000 square feet.
That's Jessie Cohen, who heads up repatriations here. She cranks open movable aisles, holding shelves and drawers, storing the museum's vast anthropology collection, including some objects that fall under the law.
We do have a segregated space for sacred objects in here. Sacred and ceremonial is tucked away and not accessed. It's restricted to tribes in official capacities.
What about human remains?
They're not in this space. Yeah. They are segregated in a separate space. Access is restricted to tribes and staff.
Yale has repatriated the remains of 500 Native people. About 600 are still here, including the remains of 7 from Franklin County, Massachusetts.
They'd come into the Peabody's collection, I think, in 3 separate collecting events.
According to an older government database, 4 came from a burial ground in Turner's Falls and were donated in 1920. Another 2 came from a, quote, Native American cemetery in Turner's, donated in 1915. And a 7th set of remains is identified only as coming from Franklin County.
Those kinds of collector's notes, like burial ground or cemetery, are helpful, but we also often have to just take with a grain of salt because we don't know how authentic they were being.
The place, now called Turner's Falls, was named for Captain William Turner, who led an attack in 1676 that massacred hundreds of native people. But tribes had another name that describes the falling water that was so loud it could be heard miles away.
Peskiomscut. Peska in the Algonquian language means thunder. Omps is a rock, and Scut is a place.
That's David Brule. He grew up in Turner's and is a member of the Nahantic Tribal Council. He also heads up National Park Service-funded research on the massacre. I asked him if he knows of any burial grounds where the ancestors from Yale Peabody might have come from. Brule takes me to a 40-acre site just over the river in Greenfield. It's called Wissatinawag, or the Shining Hill, named for the glistening mist that rose from the falls. He says before the massacre, there was a Pecumtuck village on the hill. We're standing below it.
Because this is slightly farther away from the village, and it's well-drained soils, this was the burial ground. There would have been burials right here.
But for years, at least from the 1940s into the 1990s, it was not a place to rest in peace. Sand was excavated for construction projects.
Remains were being pulled out daily. Skulls, bones, you name it. And the non-sand material was taken out and dumped in a swamp.
Brule says he doesn't know whether the ancestors at Yale were removed from here or another burial ground. But he does know which tribes were here. The Pecumtuck, Abenaki, and Nipmuc lived near the falls year-round. Others made camp in the spring when salmon migrated upriver.
Pennacook from northern New England came in, the Nonotuck, Norwottuck, Agawam. In addition, people from the coasts, especially the Wampanoag and the Narragansett.
Today's tribes from the region are likely to be invited by the Yale Peabody Museum to consult on the repatriation of ancestors from Franklin County, says Jessie Cohen.
For our Massachusetts ancestors still in the collection, I'm going to reach out to Massachusetts federally recognized tribes, potentially unfederally recognized tribes, and go from there.
The proposed regs would give Yale and other museums a strict deadline, 2.5 years to complete the process. And even before the rules are approved, Yale Peabody is tripling its current repatriation staff of 1. Tribes are also understaffed. In addition to consulting with museums, they carry the burden of finding new burial places, along with the physical and emotional work of reburying their ancestors. For New England Public Media, I'm Nancy Cohen.
And Nancy Cohen joins us live in studio right now. Thanks for that piece, Nancy, and thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Give us a little bit of a reporter's notebook about what put you on the trail of this story.
It was around October 2020. I was talking with somebody named Bonnie Hartley. She's the historic preservation manager for the Stockbridge-Munsee Nation. And she told me that one of her primary jobs was working on repatriating ancestors and objects. And I had never heard, I did not know, well, I had heard about it, but I didn't know a lot about it, and I didn't know the depth and the breadth of it. And she said to me at that time, she said, the road to bring them home can sometimes be incredibly, painfully long. So it's a difficult process for tribes to get the remains of their ancestors back.
How did these remains end up in those museums and institutions in the first place?
We have a piece of tape, don't we?
Yes, we do.
This is from Professor Sam Redman from UMass, talking about sort of the start of it.
Remains of Native Americans were especially prized in the project to try to understand race around the world. And so remains of Native Americans were collected especially by museums in the United States, but museums in Germany and in England as well. So there was really this feverish chase in the 19th and early 20th century for Native American human remains that resulted in this really dark and complicated history.
I mean, Redmond told me, I did that interview a couple of years ago, and he told me that this was really about scientific racism and essentially anthropologists, archaeologists, museums trying to establish a racial hierarchy with Native people and Black people at the bottom. We have another piece of tape from him where he talks about a little bit about how the remains actually got to the museums.
It was quite common for a farmer who was tilling his field for the first time to find a set of remains, put them in a box, and then maybe a year later, maybe a month later, send them to a museum of some kind. And so collections at massive museums like the Smithsonian, but also at small colleges. Sometimes there are these large collections where they were large archaeological excavations where 40 bodies were uncovered at the same time. And sometimes it was really ad hoc where a single skeleton might be found here or there. But over the course of a century of collecting, that might result in the bodies of a dozen or 24 or 100 ancestors from the same tribe being in a collection.
That was Sam Redman from UMass. So today, according to the National Park Service, which oversees the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, we have 108,000 the remains of Native people in institutions. And so when I learned this, and I first spoke to Bonnie Hartley, I was trying to figure out, how do I want to report on this? I knew I wanted to report on it, and I wasn't sure. And I thought, like, as many public radio reporters might think, is that I wanted to help my listeners picture this process of repatriation. And so I thought maybe I could sit in on consultations between tribes and museums. Maybe I could see or understand how the remains were stored. The reality was and is that reporters and anyone else are not invited to these consultations. No one other than tribes and some people in museums are allowed near the remains. And so after trying hard to get access, I realized this was not the way, and this wasn't the way to tell the story. And so I tried to think about, what do people in Western Mass and Central Mass, how can I help them understand this? Because the number to me is really large, 108,000. It's hard. It becomes sort of this, this thing that we can't picture. So I thought, well, maybe I can figure out what happened. Were there people from Western Mass and Central Mass whose graves were robbed and dug up? Can I figure that out? And there is the database, which is publicly available to everybody, the NAGPRA database. You can research it and find out this information. So right now there are the remains, according to the NAGPRA database, and it may not be entirely accurate, there are the remains of 63 people from Western and Central Mass still in museums.
That's still a large number.
It is a large number. And we're speaking with NEPM's Nancy Cohen, who's done this report about NAGPRA and the repatriation of the ancestors, which I love that is how it is, how you've written it in the story. That these are not bones. These are, these are people. These are humans who lived a human life. And it's really hard to think of it, as you were saying, in the vast numbers of 108,000, or even in the 63 that are from this area. And this is something that you learned in your reporting on this story, in the way that these human beings have been referred to.
Right. And what I started to do to try to sort of tell the story is I got on the phone and I called every museum and school and library that was listed in the database that as having the remains of somebody from our area. And my phone calls stirred up some things at these places. There is one museum where the curator was brand new, and she had no idea that the museum had the remains of one person. Now that museum is hiring somebody to help her repatriate. I contacted a library in our area where there was the remains of one person listed on the NAGPRA website. And in fact, that was inaccurate. The remains had been repatriated, but the paperwork hadn't been updated. But one interesting thing, this was actually Northfield. One thing that was interesting is that older people in that town remember the skeleton, as they called it, of this person on display in the library when they were growing up.
Wow.
That the remains of that person, that ancestor has been repatriated, and they're no longer on the list. So I went, it was sort of shoe leather phone calls, of trying to track down what happened to each of these people.
Who gets to initiate the process of repatriation?
Good question. So one of the things about this 108,000 and these 63 people are that what happened was, I'm just going to give you a little history. When NAGPRA was passed in 1990, in the 70s and 80s, activists organized to get this law passed. It was passed in 1990. Museums had 5 years to make an inventory and report to the federal government how many people did they have, who collected them, when were they donated, any information they had was supposed to be given to the federal government. In the case of these 108,000 and the 63, they were all classified as culturally unidentifiable. Right now, what is happening, the reason I did this story is that there are new regulations that are going to go into effect. They're going to get rid of this term culturally unidentifiable, which is offensive to Native people who believe their ancestors are affiliated with a culture. And in the past, and even still today, if remains are classified that way, the museums are not required to reach out to the tribes. If the tribes reach out to them, they can respond and will respond, but they're not required to. The new regulations are going to change some of that. They're going to require museums to be more proactive, and they're going to speed up the process and have it be completed in 2.5 years. If you're interested, I can tell you about some things that were written back in 1990 when these inventories were made. I'll give you a couple of examples, okay? So one individual from Hampden County was donated to Harvard University's Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology by somebody named B.W. Lord on May 13th, 1885, and was collected at, quote, a Longmeadow burial place in Longmeadow on the Connecticut River. So that's one example. Another is the remains of another person in the Warren Anatomical Museum at Harvard was from Deerfield and were, quote, found by Mr. Roswell Field on an unknown date before 1877. The remains were, quote, disinterred during the plowing of a field.
So just dug up while they were in planting
so
season.
it's not all grave robbing, and it's not all necessarily nefarious. But what I think is interesting about this is instead of, race is a social construct, not a biological construct. Instead of using strict biology to try to identify these remains that are in these museums, they're going to use more geography to say it is maybe more likely than not that this is the remains of an ancestor of this particular tribe that was in this particular region. Is that sort of the next phase of this?
That's right. So it's actually already in the law, but as one of my sources, Shannon O'Loughlin from the Association of American Indian Affairs said, they're now going to sort of hit the museums on the head and say, you can use geography. This doesn't have to be a scientific research project to associate, to make a cultural association. The last remains that I just mentioned that were dug up in Deerfield, the museum identified them as being with the Pocumtuck tribe.
Nancy Cohen from the NEPM News Department, thank you so much for sharing this story with us. I can't wait to hear about the next chapter in it as this law continues throughout the rest of 2023.
Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Soon we'll get knee-deep into some of the cool folks arriving at Mass MoCA with General Manager Addison McDonald.
But first, some delicious iced tea with the word nerd, Emily Brewster, resident wordster from Merriam-Webster in Springfield.
But sadly, no cocoa. You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on NEPM.
I like how the NPR reporter who wants to make sure we hear his name correctly says Franco Ordonez and takes that dramatic pause, because if he didn't, it would sound like Frank Ordonez. So he says Franco Ordonez every time, and I love it every time.
Franco Ordonez, NPR News.
Like Sneak Ta Prakash. I really thought that was her name. I think it's actually Sneakta Prakash.
Oh, yeah. See, but
That's
it's again, we can't hear it very well when we're not seeing it.
Chris used to also say that it was Ba Bedwards.
Oh, Bob. I love anybody whose name is Bob. I always say Ba is there for. It's so fun to me. I stole that from Space Coast to Coast.
Bob Odenkirk. That sounds good. But you know how I said it? I said Ba Bodenkirk.
Don't worry about it, Ba. Moltar can fix it in the edit.
Oh, yeah, it's fun.
But I love that McSweeney's article where they're just going, like, making up NPR names.
Yeah. I like Scott Horsley,
yeah.
especially when if he actually sounds a little sick, when he's like, it's Scott Horsley. And I'm like, yeah, he does sound a little bit. Emily Brewster, resident wordster from Merriam-Webster. This weekend is the unofficial kickoff to summer, which may mean some people want to start partaking in refreshing beverages like iced tea.
My dad calls it Start Having Barbecues Day.
Too bad it doesn't happen on a Tuesday, because Barbecues Day sounds...
Is that going to be a thing that we do now?
Barbecues Day. I like where we're going with this.
I like that too. That's good. Barbecues Day.
But iced tea is what you want to talk about, not the legendary rapper.
Original gangster.
And actor.
Yeah, and actor now. More of it. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess he's acted in a lot of things, probably more now than he rapped, but he's always a rapper.
Honestly, he was acting and rapping at the same time. You see him in Breakin'
Yeah, I know,
in
he
the
is
first one
but
with a perm.
My man Ozo's here, you better know he's always gonna steal the show. You gotta pay attention to beating the boss, baby.
And there is iced tea and cocoa.
I said, would you ever consider dating a gangster rapper?
I said, well, if he's nice.
And then the pimp gods from heaven sent me the line. I said, if you take the N off nice, you get ice, baby.
Oh my God.
So I saw a couple of episodes of that. That's fun. Anyway, enough about iced tea, but linguistically, we're talking about iced tea.
And iced coffee. How do you feel about it when people call it iced tea and ice coffee? Do you think that's fine? Is that what you say? Or do you think that, especially when you're writing it down, that it should be iced tea and iced coffee?
I feel like it should be iced just because icing seems verb-like to me, or like ice as is either the thing or verb, and then iced is an adjective describing the thing.
Okay.
Is how my brain works.
Yeah. All right. So you're thinking through, like, logically what makes sense. But I couldn't even really hear if you put the D in there or not.
Iced tea? Oh, I guess you don't necessarily pronounce it, do you? You don't really think about it.
I think I say iced coffee and iced tea all the time. I think if I were to write it, though, I would definitely write iced tea like the rapper, which means no D, just because I've just seen that so many times. And I might write iced coffee and not even think about it.
Yeah, no, writing that D comes along both times, and I don't like that I said that sentence.
I went to school and I got a degree.
Yeah, it's funny, right? Because in just kind of a normal conversational English, we don't pronounce the D in any of these cases, because if we did, our speech would sound really halted. Iced tea. Would you like a glass of iced tea?
I would like a glass of iced tea.
Yeah. So there's this process, a very natural process. We elide that sound, and we do it in a lot of words too, this elision. We just chop off these sounds. For example, you don't say first thing this morning, we're going to do whatever, right? We say first thing.
Right, first thing.
Because those kinds of consonant clusters are really clunky. It's very natural to just lop them off. But we're familiar enough with the word first and thing that clunkiness doesn't affect the spelling. Nobody spells it FIRSS and then thing, right? We don't do that. But with something like iced tea, we do, because the ice actually does make sense. Right? It's tea that you can ice. Or is it tea that has been iced?
Or is it just ice in tea? Ice plus tea.
Right.
But that would still make it iced tea.
Oh, right. I mean, right. If only we had our multisyllabic past tense from days of yore. This iced tea. Would you like a glass of iced tea?
I like that, though. I would say it like that.
I mean, I would say it like that now.
I know.
All right. From here on out.
It's iced tea, everybody. Get on board.
This is a total aside now at this point, but since we're talking about rappers, Jesse Thorne from Maximum Fun and the Judge John Hodgman podcast started in one of the episodes I was on calling Dr. Dre Dr. Doctory, and I can't unsee it.
Turn me back to the old me.
I'm never going to call him Iced Tea. It will always be iced tea, but Dr. Dre is now somehow Dr. Doctory to me. Since America runs on Dunkin', as we all know, and they are not a sponsor, and I will also say I don't like them. I mean, I don't like their coffee. I don't like their coffee.
Monty, them's fighting words. You know where we live.
But I figure they may be the ones to go to linguistically, and they do have it written as iced coffee with a D. on their
Yeah,
menu.
interesting, right?
Well-
Now, Lipton, the giant, the tea giant, international tea giant, on their website for American English, their US website, they write iced tea with the D, but for their British website, it's just ice tea.
Whoa.
Yeah. Yeah. So they know that we over here on this side of the pond are sticklers for that D. Like, why are we? I'm really not sure, except that there is this desire to retain it.
You would think the
Yeah.
British would be the ones that would say iced tea if anybody was going to do it.
Rice.
Aluminium.
Maybe, or they take their tea so seriously that maybe, like icing it is maybe something that is, enough of a travesty.
I actually think iced coffee is a travesty, too, to a certain degree. I think of it as a coffee-flavored dessert drink. For me, coffee must all the time be hot and black. That's it.
I mean, cold brew is very nice. I felt the same way until cold brew became a thing, and now I quite like it.
It's fine.
Throwing down gauntlets left and right, Monty. Okay.
Don't like Dunkin' Donuts and don't like iced coffee.
Rawr, get off my lawn.
I like my iced coffee to taste like melted ice cream, coffee ice cream. Love coffee ice cream. Speaking of ice cream, guess what ice cream used to be?
Iced cream.
Yes.
We should start calling it that again. Let's bring this back. Iced cream. Iced
cream. And you didn't get a glass of ice water. You got a glass of iced water.
Wow.
Like in 1870 something, there is a usage commentator. His name is Richard Grant White. And in 1871, he wrote in his book, Words and Their Uses, Past and Present. He was bemoaning the fact that they were calling iced cream, ice cream, and that people were calling iced water, ice water. But then just 35 years later, this other guy, Frank Vizzatelli, said that it's all done. There's no way that we can possibly put this toothpaste back in the bottle. That is not actually what he said.
You have a toothpaste bottle?
Yeah, they had bottles then.
Oh, okay.
Don't you know this?
Yes,
all the toothpaste came in bottles.
Old-timey days.
Vizzatelli wrote, "It is so firmly established that it is doubtful if they will ever be changed." So in just like 30 years, it went from being this thing like, oh no, everybody's doing this, to being this thing like, yeah, this is set in stone. This is done.
Do you think it's because of ice cream? You scream, we all scream for ice cream?
Ice cream. You scream, we all scream for ice cream. Well, no, that's better.
I need you to find out when that came into use.
I'm going to try to Google that while we do this because...
These are all examples where we have iced in front of something that starts with a pretty hard consonant. And I'm trying to think of, even water is relatively like, the wa of it is kind of hard to put after a D. Like there are hard things to put after Ds. I wonder if it's because of how percussive like the next word is. Like, are there examples with it being used with anything that starts with like a vowel or a softer consonant?
Well, skim milk used to be skimmed milk.
Right.
Makes
and
sense.
M is a M, and actually W, the M and the W are both consonant sounds that are kind of considered, closer to vowels than some other consonant sounds, than the plosives certainly, or the fricatives.
I feel like skimmed milk is almost even harder. That's like next level because you have all the to try and get out at the same time.
There is ice in ice cream, I guess, and there is ice in iced coffee, but you do actually have to skim the milk to make skimmed milk. To me, that one makes the most sense to call it skimmed milk.
Yeah. But the fact is that these consonant clusters are clunky enough, they interrupt our speech enough that they get dropped from the written word. We learn most of our language by hearing it. So all it takes is for a generation of people to encounter the term skimmed milk only in speech. They never hear that D pronounced, and it just eventually loses it in print also. Wax paper used to be waxed paper. Oh, and musically, think about the term box set, like a box set. It used to be boxed. Nobody says boxed anymore, right?
I don't
and
think
also,
so.
Logically, then there's the fact that the box is the box even still around? Does it still come in a box?
Sometimes they do.
I used to love box sets.
I haven't bought one recently, but
No.
I looked at the Weird Al one for a real long period of time, and then I looked at my wallet and I cried.
I got the Led Zeppelin one when I was a kid, and I was like, this is the best. Follow up to the ice cream. The I scream, you scream, we all scream for ice cream, according to Wikipedia, is a popular song first published in 1927 with words and music by Howard Johnson, who has got his hojo working. I guess. That's a different Howard Johnson, I think. It does say that this song went into the public domain on January 1st, 2023, so we're going to use it officially as our theme song for the Fabulous 413 for free from now on.
That is awesome.
Veto.
Well,
Yeah, okay.
Veto
and it was
this.
written just a few years after Visitelli said it's a done deal.
So it was
Everybody
already a
says
done
ice cream
deal, and then
is
the
fun.
song came out. It wasn't the song came out, and then it became a done deal.
That's right.
All right, well,
Yeah.
but here we are.
Yeah.
Are there other past tense verbs describing things that you see losing their tense before words? Is there more of this happening now? I mean, box set is pretty new too.
Yeah, box set is pretty new. What about whipped cream?
Yeah.
I know and would write it whipped cream, but I would almost never say it.
I say it, but that's, I think, old kitchen habits.
You say whipped cream?
Yeah, whipped cream.
I definitely say whipped cream.
But it always ends up sounding more like a T, like WIPT, whipped.
Whipped cream.
Yeah.
Whipped
Well, and
cream.
that's a normal thing for that ED ending, that suffix to do, right? After a voiceless consonant, it is a T. And after a voiced consonant, it's a D. So skimmed, whipped. That's just its normal habit.
It's not too late to whip it.
No.
You must whip it.
Real good.
In other languages, it's almost like it becomes a portmanteau, I guess. They get smashed up and then spelled that way. Like in Spanish, sometimes if the consonants are going to blend together or if the vowel is going to be the same as the beginning vowel of the next word, they'll all become one big word and drop some stuff off. I'm actually surprised it doesn't happen more in English because it happens so much in the spoken English. See, you would think it would happen more in the written English, but
I wonder if with the prevalence of, the recently increased dramatic prevalence of written language, we see so much more written language than we ever have before, informal written language, like we're texting all the time, we're online all the time, where we're reading and not hearing. If this kind of shift, this kind of elision will be slowed down some, it might be. And it might not be. It might also be sped up because people will be writing the way that they speak more frequently. And so they'll be dropping these ED endings to reflect their own speech. I don't know. I think it's pretty interesting. Sometimes, you think that there's an older version that's not old-fashioned. Actually, old-fashion is older, but they both date to the 16th century.
wow. So if I say
isn't it?
you were driving in an old-fashioned car, I'm not saying it incorrectly. It was actually older-fashioned than old-fashioned.
Well, if by correct you mean like what is more established and older,
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, old-fashioned. Actually, the earliest evidence that we have of it is just a few years before old-fashioned.
Wow. And now I
And
want
they're both super old.
I'm now
Who even knows what was old-fashioned back then?
the cocktail is most places referred to as an old-fashioned, but I think I probably out loud say I'll have an old-fashioned instead of an old-fashioned. I'm right either way, and now I want one.
Especially after when you're ordering your second one.
Yeah.
Yes. Will you have it iced?
Yeah. I'll have it after my Long Island iced tea.
Oh, no. Oh, don't do that. Yeah. Don't drink those,
Nope.
folks.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan
Bad
of those.
ideas.
Yeah.
Those years are behind us.
Got a linguistic conundrum for the word nerd? Email us, thefab413@nepm.org, or text us 1-800-639-9120.
Up next, Mass MoCA General Manager of Performing Arts and Film, Addison McDonald, talks to us about their summer schedule.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on NEPM. Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. I'm Monty Belmonte.
And I'm Khalees Smith.
Khalees is excited because of this music that we're listening
I'm
to
so
right
psyched
now.
about this.
Who
man.
is this, Khalees?
This is Phony People. And Phony People are coming to Mass MoCA this Saturday. It's going to be fantastic. I am absolutely, almost certainly going to be there. But
one person who I'm very sure is going to be there is Addison McDonald, who is the general manager of Performing Arts and Film at Mass MoCA, and who joins us here in the Fabulous 413. We call you Addie. Can we call you Addie on the show?
Please do. I think that'll save a lot of time.
Yeah, we should probably have a million full disclosures about Addie as well, but do we? Should we get into those?
we don't have to.
Well,
It's totally
Mass
fine.
MoCA is an underwriter, Betsy reminds us. That's the only one that we have.
Mass MoCA is an underwriter.
So yeah, we and that's not why we talk to them. We talk to them because we're legitimately excited about the cool things, as Khalees is, about phony people.
Yeah, and in no small part because we were watching, like, your ads are popping up in many places, but I had as a thread when I mentioned, like, phony people were coming, someone was like, I don't know who's doing their booking, but I need to be their best friend. They've literally keyed into my entire playlist. And I was like, yeah, for real. So, like, what are some of the cool things that you're excited about? Actually, before we get into that, there's a show that you're going to be having that come up that got postponed from COVID called The Celestials. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and thanks for talking about that, and thanks for having me.
Oh, sure.
The Celestials is it's like kind of a little pet project that we've been working on for a while. It's basically an adaptation of a book written by Karen Shepard and adapted by Peter Glazer, and both are Williamstown residents. And it's a story of immigration in North Adams in the 1870s and kind of families colliding, and great historical drama. And it's been adapted to the stage, and we're going to be having a reading of it. It's one of the many things that has been postponed again and again, and finally we're getting a chance to bring to the stage. I feel like last summer with the Roots and Solid Sound, we were finally checking off everything that had been postponed again and again. And this one, I feel like, is the last one, and it's appropriate that it's a local one and something that we're really proud of. We're doing it in partnership with MCLA and the North Adams Historical Society. So it's going to be fascinating and really fun.
Wicked cool.
Yeah, one thing I didn't know about it until reading about this reading on your site is that North Adams once was the home to the second largest Chinese population east of the Mississippi. So it seems like this is an amazing story to be telling. And what I think a lot of people probably don't know, that either just go to the museum or go to shows at the museum, is that Mass MoCA is an incubator like this to do these, stage readings, different types of readings of projects in development, some of which then go on, to Broadway, right? Addie McDonald from Mass MoCA? Yeah.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's the fun part of the job, is that we can act as incubators. We've always said that we have like space and time up there. And so a lot of the stuff that we present, we really see as, hoping to give legs to have a future. And part of our job is really not only to give artists space and time, but give them the chance to learn to talk about what they're creating, how to talk to future presenters. And we really hope that everything that we present keeps popping up across the country and growing. And that's really specifically how we approached this summer, because last year we felt like we were doing a lot of big shows, and we still want to do that. But this summer, looking at the landscape, all the great bookings that Jim and Green River are doing, our friends at Bombex,
who will be on the show on Friday.
Yeah. Love them. And, and right now the Valley is such a, and Western Mass in general, is such an incubator for up and coming artists and established artists. And so it's great that we can always have throughout the summer, like, something to do, whether it's in North Adams or in Northampton, and get people's muscle reflex and muscle memory going to shows, back, so that they, are fine going out once, twice a week and seeing each other.
And I think, like, another thing that I think is cool about some of the things that are repeating it and get incubated at Mass MoCA is that, again, it just really encourages people to work with more than, like, the space in the classical sense of working in space. Like, Bang on a Can weekend is one of the things that I think of in that regard. And you've had, like, dance performances in the middle of, like, other exhibits in the museum. But, like, talk about Bang on a Can, because I think it's way cooler than people give it credit for.
And the longest running festival there, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe we're approaching our 22nd year with them. Next May, actually, will be the beginning of Mass MoCA's 25th anniversary. So Bang on the Can has been with us for just close to the original days. And I had no idea what I was getting into when I started with Mass MoCA. This will be my 5th summer. And Bang on the Can is essentially a takeover of the museum, if not parts of the town. Bang on the Can is a group of established and beloved new music, classical music musicians who essentially act as faculty to up and coming and younger musicians, composers, songwriters, dancers. And they take over the museum by doing a number of classes, and in turn, they do recitals throughout the day, throughout the museum. So you can be wandering, looking at art, looking at James Turrell 1 minute, or riding the roller coaster 1 minute, and then you'll see a student with a trumpet and a marimba playing some new composition that you've never heard of. And it is kind of, in my opinion, kind of the very essence of what we do, because it's new, it's slightly chaotic, but it's always surprising, always one of a kind.
And it's worth noting that you mentioned or riding the roller coaster. There is an indoor roller coaster right now at Mass MoCA. It's not like one that you can wait in a physical line in, but you can get in a virtual line and maybe ride that roller coaster. But it's still pretty amazing to see this indoor wooden roller coaster in a giant former factory that's now an art museum.
It reminds me a lot of the old Riverside, truth be told.
It does a little bit. Yeah. Probably just as rickety.
Oh, it's pretty secure, I'd say. It's one of the perks of the job, because people sign up for reservations and sometimes people don't show up. So if you are working at Mass MoCA at your desk and sign up, I'll get a text at 2:15 says the rider didn't show up, and I'll text back and say, I'll be there in 5, and I'll sprint across the museum and get to ride the roller coaster, and then I'm very efficient for the rest of the day. Getting my work done.
We're speaking with Addison McDonald, Addie, General Manager of Performing Arts and Film at Mass MoCA, and talking about some of the things that are coming up this summer, the summer season, getting kicked off unofficially this weekend with Phony People, who Khalees is very excited to see.
Them and Oscar Jerome, who I'm just amazed that you're getting. But who are you excited to bring in this summer, Addie?
Well, there's a number of them. I mean, going back to Bang on the Can, I love their residency wraps up at the end of July with a festival called Loud Weekend, which is primarily curated by the founders of Bang on the Can, but have a number of great acts, including the 50th anniversary of Cronus Quartet. I too am really excited about Oscar Jerome. I think that's one that in early July, we usually go for kind of more of a similar kind of festive band, but he's such a kind of singular talent and was playing the Montreal Jazz Fest that we, couldn't lose that opportunity to present him. He's the type of performer that, again, is not on everyone's radar, but it's one of those, he's a performer that those who come out will be fans for life, and hopefully it'll kind of further his,
if you're going, bring a friend who has no idea who he is, and hopefully you'll make a convert, sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah, and then very shortly, a couple weeks from now, Rina Sawayama is coming, who I'm very excited about, and prompted my 18-year-old son, who had no interest in the movie John Wick 4, to come see John Wick 4 with me in the middle of the night, because she's prominently featured in that movie, but she's also a phenomenal musician as well, and she's coming to Mass MoCA.
All over the place, genre-wise. So cool.
On June 9th.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be a great show. And that was, we've always been, fans of Rina. And, I work with a bunch of 20-somethings, and sometimes a name comes across and I'm, I scratch my head for a second and they jump up and down. And so it prompts me to do a deep dive. And she's phenomenal. I mean, she's a really gifted, songwriter. There is a lot of big shows throughout Western Mass this summer, but we really were excited about this one just because it's a straight ahead, like legitimate pop concerts, flashy lights, and, really fun. And, it's a kickoff show. She's going to be, practicing beforehand, because the next day she's going to Governor's Ball, and she's got a number of festival stops. So we're just really thrilled to be able to host her, get her tour up and running, and have a really fun kind of pop night.
Yeah. Again, it's a little bit of a tour incubator, in the same way that you could go see Here Lies Love, David Byrne's musical on Broadway right now. That was born at Mass MoCA years and years ago. So you never know what you'll encounter when you go to that museum. Again, they are an underwriter, but I've said many times before, even worked at this station, that going to Mass MoCA it's one of my favorite places on earth, not to mention the fact that the summer will be rounded out by Pixies, Modest Mouse, and Cat Power. That one sold out, Addie, or no?
It's pretty sold out, I'd say.
Pretty sold out. You heard it. You heard it here. Maybe not sold out. Pretty sold out.
Pretty sold out means there's a little bit of space maybe for you.
Yeah, and we hope to get out there to broadcast the Fabulous 413 live from Mass MoCA potentially a few times throughout the course.
We would be thrilled. We are so excited to do that show. I was shocked that, we've never had the Pixies. We've never had Modest Mouse. We've had Cat Power. I think Cat Power passed through there, through MoCA maybe 12 years ago. And so I think it's going to be a great evening, but that really took off. I mean, my gosh.
Get ready, Addie, get ready.
Yeah. Addie McDonald, General Manager of Performing Arts and Film at Mass MoCA. We'll see you in North Adams, if not at the brewery in my neighborhood like I did this weekend again soon. Thanks for joining us here on the Fabulous 413.
Thanks so much for having me, and look forward to seeing you all this summer.
Right on. Welcome back to the Fabulous 413 and our moment that is maybe not as fabulous as the rest of today's show because we're all a little heartbroken here.
Right before we went on the air, we got the news that Tina Turner passed away. The AP story says Tina Turner, the unstoppable singer and stage performer who teamed with husband Ike Turner for a dynamic run of hit records and live shows in the 60s and 70s and survived her horrifying marriage to triumph in middle age with the chart-topping What's Love Got to Do With It, has died at age 83. And as a child of the 80s, that is the era of Tina Turner that I entered into. But it's also worth noting that prior to this sad, sad story that we had a weekly feature that was definitely dedicated in homage to Tina Turner, which is The Wine Thunderdome, which comes from Mad Max 3, Beyond Thunderdome, which stars some guy who plays Mad Max, who we don't even need to talk about.
Not really.
And also...
Honestly, he's kind of a side character in all of those movies.
Yeah, right. Great movies, though.
He's audience POV and doesn't realize it, except in the very, very first one. But
Tina Turner is Master Blaster of Beyond Thunderdome, where there's a big fight dome, and two people enter, and one person leaves. And my previous radio gig in February of 2020, I held what I called the Grateful Dead Thunderdome, where I was forced to listen to the Grateful Dead against my will to raise money for the Cancer Connection in Northampton. So my Tina Turner love goes all the way back to the 1980s, but I'm sure
my Tina Turner love comes, through the 80s, through the 90s, because, really, she never really stopped making really awesome things. But when there was first rumblings that there was going to be an X-Men movie, in my perfect casting, she would have been Storm.
Ah, wow. That would have been really cool.
I wanted Tina Turner to be Storm. I knew that age-wise, no one would think about it, but look-wise, it was perfect. Yeah. Especially for mid-'80s Storm. And when it was Halle Berry, I can't tell you how heartbroken I was. Almost as heartbroken as I am now.
Oh, you don't like Halle Berry Storm?
That's a longer conversation. Okay. We definitely do not have time for. This geek is not for it.
All right, I like it. But back to Tina Turner. I mean, of course, there is the idea that she overcame this horrible marriage with her husband, Ike Turner, but then goes on to record with one of the most hard to deal with, mentally ill producers of all time to come up with what I think is one of the greatest Tina Turner songs of all time, that one that we let off with here, River Deep, Mountain High. And you hear the stories of what she had to endure after, Ike is part of this session too, but I mean, not only is she dealing with her husband, but she's now dealing with this controlling, manipulative, and very mentally ill producer to come up with some of the greatest music of all time.
Which I think is part of why this song is so important and so cool, because it's part of her comeback and her triumph and just being we don't need it. I don't need anybody else. I just need me. And she always had that.
Right. And then, of course, there's the What's Love Got to Do With It movie that cements her legacy in real time.
Robin.
Did I mention Phil Spector was the I didn't mention the
Oscar.
I just thought everybody knew which producer I was talking about River Deep, Mountain High, but our producers, they were like, you got to say that it was Phil Spector.
It's Phil Spector.
Yeah. Maybe I didn't even want to say his name, because we are celebrating the life and legacy of Tina Turner, and we will continue to raise a glass in her honor every Friday and beyond Thunderdome when we do our Wine Thunderdome, as we will with Provisions this Friday.
There you go.
Tomorrow, though, in the Fabulous 413, Maps, Music and Poetry Synchronized. We'll talk to the students and teachers working across disciplines and school districts about this multi-town, multi-state, multi-nation collaboration.
And is the U.S. about to default on our loans? We'll talk with U.S. Congressman Jim McGovern. Got a question for him? Email us at fab413@nepm.org.
I'm Monty Belmonte.
Khalees Smith. Talk to you tomorrow on the Fabulous 413.